to start, there are a number of candidates for governor in the GOP primary.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure it is a number.
Yes.
What that number is, I'm not positive.
Okay.
But, what sets you apart from the other candidates in the race?
So, I mean, the number one thing that sets me apart is that I'm not a career politician, right? I have not spent my life kind of plotting how I was going to become the next, become the governor of the state of New Hampshire. Honestly, it was not even on my bucket list of things to get done in life. But I just feel like, sort of we the people have not really been represented that well in a corner office. In particular, we'll talk about some of the business stuff going on there. I do have the sense, and this is kind of a more mature description of this, and I can back up a little bit. And I say more mature, meaning, my own understanding has matured as I've walked through this race a little bit more. Is that a lot of the candidates focus on, becoming governor as if that's the goal, and that's not really the goal of the race. That's not really the prize. That is the beginning of the process to then, in my mind anyways, once again, try to make sure that the state is working for the people of New Hampshire. That's just the beginning is when you win the race as the governor. And so, I'm in this race because I'm not a career politician. I've not spent my life doing those kinds of things. I am in this race because I do have a fairly extensive business background. I know what it takes to kind of create not just jobs, but good jobs for the state. As I often tell people, like 3 of my kids have graduated from college. They would all love to come back to New Hampshire, the place they grew up in. But there's just not that many great opportunities for them back in this state. And so, one ended up with a job in Chicago, another took a job in the Washington, D.C. area, which, by the way, is where all your money's being spent if you're looking for it, as they got a lot going on down there. And the third has what I refer to as kind of the consolation prize of New Hampshire economic development, which is Boston, kind of close but no cigar. Even over here in Keene, you have a few folks who make that trip down to Massachusetts on a regular basis. As I say, it's just a sad state of affairs when you have to travel to Massachusetts to earn enough money to come home and pay your real estate taxes here in New Hampshire. So, would like really to focus on trying to fix that problem for the state.
Okay. It seems, and so you were elected to the House in 2014.
Exactly.
So that seems like a big step. As you mentioned, you're not a career politician, but it seems that you would want to have some depth of knowledge of how the state government works to jump
to be
into
effective.
that. What have you learned in those 2 years?
Yeah, so my career is, so I'm not, a neophyte to budgets and numbers and large organizations and how they function. Started my career at a company called PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I'm a CPA. I have audited companies all over the world, like digging into their finances, helping them improve shareholder value, looking for waste, fraud, abuse, making the organizations really function. Left there, I've been the chief financial officer for a small public company. Left there, have run, I started a company at my kitchen table. My wife, eventually got tired of not being able to serve dinner, and we got, so I got an office, which was I moved into the bedroom of one of my kicked a kid out and moved into their bedroom. But that organization did well. Grew that, good people, hard work, grew that business to over 800 employees operating in over 20 countries. Sold that in 2009. And that's really when probably, I was alerted to this idea of, hey, can I give back here? Because honestly, while I was running my business, I'm not proud of this, but I wasn't really that tuned in. I had my head down. I was running a business. I say my life consisted of airplanes and soccer games, because I got a bunch of kids too. And I thought I could give back, so I ran for the legislature. So in answer to your question, what I would say is that I've got a lot of executive experience. Okay. I've got a lot of entrepreneurial types of experience. So, in terms of trying to solve problems in different ways and bring unique perspectives to things. But then I have run for the legislature. In the legislature, I serve on 3 committees, and you probably know that typically everybody gets 1 committee. So I have child and family law, pension reform, and finance. So sitting on finance, I know what the budget process looks like. I've been through it. I'm not that happy with it, honestly. I think that there's some things we can do to improve that process. And so what I think I've learned is that there are some tools from my business experience that are going to carry over into the government, and there's some that are not going to carry over. Most notably, I tell people, in business, when you're the CEO, you snap your fingers and people go, okay. In the legislature, you snap your fingers and nobody cares. Nothing happens. Like, you really work on building consensus, bringing people around an issue, finding where the common ground is. And as I also like to say is, so I'm ideological. I actually think everybody is ideological, which basically means you have things you believe in. But you have to be willing to work with other people because they have things they believe in too. And so you try and find the common ground. And I'm happy to get half a loaf. I'm happy to get a slice off of the loaf if that's all I'm going to get in terms of working with people, trying to move forward. And I think I've done fairly well with that process. Working with other people, across party lines. I describe myself as a practical conservative. Like, when you're a business guy, you just like getting things done. In my business, I would describe myself, I say, like, a good day was when I got 51% of the decisions correct, because that means I move forward, as opposed to moving backwards. And so the same thing, same kind of mentality I would bring to I brought it to the legislature, and I'll bring it as well to the governor's office of just trying to work with folks, figure out, where do we share common ground and how do I move forward on something.
You all ready to dive into some policy issues?
Sure.
Okay.
Go for it.
Let's start with energy, and the cost of which in this state are not insignificant. In fact, they're among the highest in the nation.
Yeah.
And if I understand your perfect world, the way energy generated here, energy that flows through this state would stay here. How does that occur when we're part of a shared regional grid?
Yeah, so I don't know, I'm not sure what exactly you meant by the energy that's generated here stays here, because it does complicate it, the fact that we're part of ISO, and so we share our electricity and our transmission distribution with the other New England states that we have. So I'll talk about a couple of things. So one is, relative to energy, and again, this is some of my business experience, I think we have to look for deals that are good for the citizens and really the ratepayers of New Hampshire. And too often it feels like the ratepayers are not represented in the negotiation of some of these deals, and I'll point to two examples. One is the Bow Scrubber. You guys familiar with so you got the coal power plant up there. We had a $250 million firm fixed price contract that we ended up paying $457 million for. And that's stranded cost because of, for whatever reason, it's a very high cost. That's going to be borne not by the ISO ratepayers, but by the New Hampshire ratepayers. That goes into our bills. And so we've got this stranded cost that we're going to now have to amortize off into our bills, which makes us even higher than our near neighbors, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, because they're not paying for that. Another good example is the pipeline that was proposed to come through here, and I've written about this. I think, I did an op-ed. It might have been in your paper.
You may have written that.
Yeah.
I think you did. Yeah.
I mean, one of the problems with this whole transaction was just the way that it was structured with the reservation fees. So, Kidder Morgan was looking for the New Hampshire electric ratepayers to pay the reservation fees, which were $736 million to New Hampshire ratepayers. But what we didn't know is if the gas that was coming through there associated with those reservation fees was actually going to be used for generating electricity, or it could have gone to industrial applications, or it could have been exported. So I think that New Hampshire ratepayers don't mind paying for infrastructure associated with electricity as long as it generates electricity and it's our proportional share. And so I think that's an example of, so somebody negotiated a rate and says, oh, I know, we'll just tag the ratepayers with this big infrastructure cost, and maybe they won't notice if we don't use the gas for electric generation or not. We got the same issue going on with Northern Pass right now. It's going to be $1.6 billion to bring Northern Pass into the state. That electricity is going to go into the ISO grid, which means it's going to be spread around. Maybe New Hampshire will use 10% of that. I just need to make sure that New Hampshire's not going to pay more than proportionally 10% of the cost of the infrastructure if we're not going to get the electricity. I also, however, think that the laws of supply and demand work, which means you get more supply into the system, then we can, that will drive down price. And I think that what we have to do is we need to begin to, I'm one of these all of the above types of energy guys. I mean, I think you probably saw, I was the sponsor of 1116, dealing with the net metering and stuff like that, trying to make that a market that could work for everybody. But I think that there's some other options as well, and I look to micronuclear, actually. And I know that we'll never see a nuclear plant built in New England, right? A big one. But we have nuclear technology now in Portsmouth, believe it or not. Do you know where that is?
No.
In the subs.
Oh.
Right? So it's like, so here's technology that's relatively stable. We must believe that it's fairly safe because we put it, 8,000, servicemen and women on an aircraft carrier with 2 of these reactors on them and ship them all over the world. And we've had to deal with the waste at this point in time. So I think that what we have to do is you have to kind of break out of our, our parochial thinking on some of these things and move forward, because that is, energy that doesn't have a carbon footprint. It's got other issues, obviously, but potentially could work. I mean, imagine like 3 micronuclears in the state. You got one in Portsmouth, one in Nashua, and one in Manchester, and we could probably cut our electric, prices in half.
I have this mental image of decommissioning some subs and running a bunch of electric wires into them.
Can I tell you something? Sometimes I say that. This is what you could, and if people were nervous about it, you plug a big extension cord into the side, and if you don't like it, then we can push it out to sea, or something like that. But again, we have to move forward in terms of technologies and stuff like that to solve some of these problems. There's a lot of turbine technology out there these days as well that could potentially help us. So. I just think that we need to be creative. It's not the difficulty with utilities is, I wish that there were fairy dust I could just sprinkle on this problem and rates would be in half. We'd be getting 2.3 cents like Georgia or something like that per kilowatt. It's not going to happen, right? We're here. We have the grid. We need base load. And I'm sure you guys understand how the bid stacking works. You get, so in a certain day, if they assume they need 100 gigawatts of power in that day, they take bids from the generators and they just feed them in. And the nuclear guys come in at 1.50. The hydro guys come in at 2.5 cents, and then it just goes up. But the top of our stack is, a lot of gas, which has some volatility to it. And then on the coldest and the hottest days, we eventually fire up the Bow power plant and, get electricity at, whatever cents, 18, 20 cents per kilowatt or something like that. And so we need base load, because the base load, that nice steady base load there, it pushes the guys on the top out of the, out of the bid process. And so then the average comes down for everyone. The other thing we got to watch out for on energy as well, which I don't know if anybody's paying that much attention to right now, is some of the activities that are taking place in our neighboring states. There is talk right now of taking the bid stack, and because Massachusetts and Connecticut have very high alternative energy requirements, their rate of increase in terms of ACP is much higher than ours is. And so they're talking about carving out and doing a dual stack. So you'd have kind of 75% of the energy from, traditional sources or carbon sources, and, 25% coming from, non-carbon sources. And we know this energy is going to be much higher, and they're moving in that direction because their targets are far higher than ours, but that will affect our energy rates if you got to pull in, because we know that the energy coming out of this other stack is going to be, much higher than it is through the traditional sources. And so when you blend and you get an average of the rate, it's just going to go up. So we want to be careful that our energy policy hasn't been delegated to the other states around us.
What about renewables? Are there
Yep.
obstacles to advancing solar and wind and hydro, not the least of which is not in my backyard, sort of sentiment. So how do we get over that?
Yeah, so, I don't see, there's a little bit, in those 3 sources that you said, the NIMBY is not the same in all of those. So I think relative to net metering and solar, I really believe that the PUC is going to finish their job on 11/16, and by December we are going to have a free market finally, which there's no caps and there's no cost shifting, and everybody can develop as much solar as they want, and you're off and running. The biggest problem we'll have, and this will be a good problem, is if you have so many net metering applications. Like say you're on a block and you've got a switching station on that associated with that distribution network. We have so many people who want to put net metering on there that the capacity of the switching station is not high enough. So we have to say to somebody, the switching station can only handle both of yours, but we can't handle yours because the size isn't big enough. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but then do you do something to change that capacity?
Yes, but exactly. You can switch the substation at that point in time. But I mean, that's a good. So imagine what we just said. That's a good problem to have, isn't it? In other words, that's basically saying we've had such a penetration and adoption of those technologies that all of a sudden, we're having to upgrade the infrastructure to support distributed generation. And I mean, and let me just back up again, because really, energy is going through a very strategic, shift. I mean, we are shifting from kind of a spoke or hub and spoke system where you have the big power generation plant, and then you ship it out over a transmission line, and you drop it down into distribution. We are moving to distributed generation, okay, which basically means we're not going to have the big power plant. We're going to have distribution centers, distributed generation plants, smaller plants in different places. And then ultimately, I think, where we're going to find ourselves is where everybody's generating their own power, and then they just share it across the grid. So, did I answer your question? I don't know.
You answered mine.
Okay.
I think so.
There was another. Yeah, there were two parts of that. Though. I think I got sidetracked a little.
Well,
bit.
the other part, I guess, would be the how to get past the
okay,
the objections
yeah.
to wind farms.
Well, because then you talk about
and-
wind. Yeah, I mean, we did just get the wind
Northern
project in
Pass
Antrim. Antrim is one of the districts that I represent, and so we were able to get wind in there. I mean, and a lot of those objections are associated with the site. The site evaluation committee is where those decisions are getting made. And I don't know. So solar, I don't think there's a problem. Wind has a more difficult time getting sited. And it's really a function of the site evaluation committee and the local communities whether or not they're willing to accept that technology. The hydro, I actually think we have some more opportunities because many of, we used to have a lot more hydro in the state. A lot of those were pulled out, but a lot of those lease rights associated with the generation of hydro still remain at, they might even be in the old PSNH entity, but like Eversource. And so if a local municipality, say you had a dam, or you had a river coming through here and you wanted to have the hydro in there, you may not even have access to those generation rights because they may be controlled still by Eversource. And so we need to make sure that we bring those back so that the municipalities have the option to be able to do that, control really their own energy.
What should the role of the governor be in a situation where a local community is objecting strenuously to an infrastructure project like say a pipeline or something like that, but you as a governor feel that it's in the best interest of the state as a whole?
Then I have to make the case. Well, so first of all, you do have the site evaluation committee, right? And that is, indirectly appointed by the governor. So there is a degree of influence that the governor has over that process. But I think this is part of the problem that we've had with some of these energy projects that we try to bring in is that there has not been, there's a sense that the local communities have been left out of those. In other words, they're not part of the communication and the dialogue. And I think that the role that the governor needs to play is just like we talked about in the very beginning. I mean, my job is to bring the constituents together, find the common ground, find the solutions that work for everyone, and that's the kind of a transaction that you get to go forward with.
Well, but not to be argumentative about it, but
no.
And whether you thought the Ned pipeline was good or bad, I don't think there's a community there that would have ever urged the governor to. Had the governor come out differently on it, would have ever said to the governor, "Oh well, okay, you can convince us it's a good project." But if the governor decided it's good overall for the state, how does that work?
So, well, I don't think, then really what you saw in that particular case is there was a problem with eminent domain. And so just for full disclosure, so I own property in Mason that would have had a new right-of-way cut through the property there, okay? And so, I'm not a top-down type of an approach. So really it's a FERC process at that point in time that these guys are looking at the overall benefit. As the governor, I don't get to say, I think it's good for my state. I can file as an intervener in the FERC process and say, I think it's good for our state, but those opposed can also file as interveners and say it's against that. So my job really is going to be I can have an opinion on it and I can file as an intervener and I can represent that opinion, but my job is to then make sure that, everybody, all the stakeholders are heard in that process.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is,
Yeah.
let's say your micro-nuclear
Yeah.
example, one of these is going to be cited, let's say, in Antrim or something like that. Everybody in Antrim says, no way.
Yep.
But you have decided that this is in the best interest of the state. So should the local community trump the statewide interests, or do you believe that shouldn't be the case?
I don't think that the statewide interest, that the state should be trumping the local interest. I think that there has to be, you have to work together and you find a workable solution. And so if it's in the best interest in the state, then it's eventually going to be in the best interest of a community. So you just got to find the transaction that makes sense for everybody. It's not an elegant answer, and I apologize for that. But it's not an easy thing, right? Like I'm not comfortable saying, the governor has authority to just drop it in wherever they want. If I want wind towers in Antrim, I get to say I want wind towers in Antrim. No, you have to go through a process where you get the stakeholders' input and you find a solution that everybody can be happy with. I think it's better when it's negotiated. Generally, my experience is that when you have to go through that negotiation process, the projects get better, not worse.
Yeah, and the trick would be to find the community that actually wants it.
Correct. It would be good to start there, right?
Yeah.
Somebody who at least has an interest.
In regards to the opioid crisis, the state has put several resources into that fight, particularly most recently with giving law enforcement a lot of money. In terms of the crisis itself, there are several areas where there are resources needed, such as education, counseling, treatment, and enforcement. What would your priorities be as governor? Where would you put that money?
Yep. So first of all, I'll tell you is that there were a couple of things. There was over 100 million, pieces of action taken, and that's the amount of extra money that we've appropriated in the legislature towards this issue in this last session. So, a significant amount of money has been appropriated towards this. That money has been, at best, slow to get out, and I think part of that is because. Honestly, I don't think Governor Hassan is either distracted or not or less interested, perhaps, and so not really focusing and making that a priority. Saying like, look, my job as the governor is to make sure these programs get implemented and they get implemented well. I often say to people, like, I'm running for the governorship, not for the legislature, right? So, somebody will say, what bills are you going to pass? I don't pass bills, right? My job is to make the state perform like nobody's business. So my job is to make sure that $100 million gets deployed well so that it's getting services out to the communities. In terms of the three-legged stool, which is really, it is a three-legged stool in terms of education, treatment, and law enforcement. I think that, I am not satisfied that an enforcement-only policy is going to work. We cannot arrest our way out of this. We've got to dry up the supply side. Again, probably because I'm an accountant, I have ground the economics of things. You got a criminal enterprise that's selling something, and we can try and crush the criminal enterprise, but the economic incentives for them to be engaged in this are pretty high. So can I dry up some of the economic incentives, meaning less people drug dependent, therefore they can't sell as much, therefore their business models fail. So I think what we need to do is focus primarily on the education and on the treatment to dry up the supply side associated with that equation. But I think there's another element to that too, because I'm all for, I want law enforcement engaged. I want them to go Giuliani on the bad guys who are bringing drugs into our communities. But I don't want them, I don't want them to, be in a situation of trying to lock up a bunch of drug dependent people. And so I actually brought an amendment to the Granite Hammer program, which, by the way, I'm just not even comfortable with that term. We back law enforcement into this corner. Imagine if your job is you're the hammer. Of course, like you meet the expectations, And so what I was doing is I left the $1.5 million in law enforcement, but I said, if you guys are picking up drug-dependent people, you're getting them pushed to, therapy, and treatment, not putting these people in prison. I met a woman yesterday. Her daughter has since passed away. From a drug overdose, and she was just trapped in the cycle. And they would pick her daughter up. She was using heroin, so she had heroin on her, not intent to distribute. It's a possession charge. She'd end up in the county jail for 3 months, where she had access to heroin, which was a big problem in and of itself. But she just made a broader network of individuals, and she'd be out in 3 months. In 3 months, she's even if she didn't get drugs in the jail, in 3 months you're not cured of drug dependence. It takes like 18 to 24 months. Right, so what have we accomplished by throwing this girl in jail for 3 months, other than making more, criminal contacts? So she gets back out and she's right back in the lifestyle. So it's just kind of this cycle that we're just like cycling people through. I often say that, when I hear people talk about the drug dependence issue at the state level, they treat it as if that's the problem. And I don't think so. That is a symptom of an underlying problem. We know, overprescription is one of the primary drivers. The number of opiates in our communities that are being, legally prescribed and illegally sold, that is one of these gateways that is driving this opiate crisis. And when you get to the point where you can no longer afford prescription opiates, which are costing you $70 or $80, and you can get a hit of fentanyl for $5, it becomes, economics begins to work again. And you say, you know what, I have to have this fixed, but I don't have the money. I'm going to turn to the illegal street drugs. So that becomes a problem.
In regards to that topic, another topic that tying into the opioid crisis, the mental health piece.
Yes.
Department of Health and Human Services has a lengthy waiting list of people hoping to get access. As governor, what would you say to those people? How would you try to bring that number of people on that list down?
So, again, it comes back to an implementation problem here that we have also. Again, the legislature, we appropriated money and we got beds built, and then the beds sat empty. I think last week we had built those 10 additional beds. There was only 3 that were used, and yet you had 15 people over at Catholic Medical Center sitting in, that needed to get referred into these beds, that were not being referred into these beds. And so it's partly an implementation process again, in terms of the legislature appropriates the money. We then need to get on the stick and get the job done of making sure that the services are available. We do have, it goes to the opiate crisis, but it goes to some other issues as well that we have in the state of mental health. The state of mental health issues in our state is not good. We know that we had the problem with the woman who ended up killing herself after she was just discharged. We've got the doctor's contract that's being negotiated, and I don't get the sense that anybody's really leading on that in terms of trying to say, okay, so it's a relatively simplistic way of looking at it, but here's a problem, and how are we going to solve that problem, and just going through that process. So,
isn't part of the problem too the difficulty recruiting professionals to the state? So how does that get addressed?
So I think that gets addressed, and probably again, my economics is going to kick in. The reason why we ended up outsourcing to Dartmouth anyways is because that the state pay scale was so low that we couldn't afford to pay them. So what we said is, we'll give you guys a contract and you pay them. Apparently they're not paying them enough either, so that they're having difficulty. It's a supply and a demand thing. I think, we're going to see the same thing whether it's in that application. I think we have the same issue going on in law enforcement right now.
So in what resources the legislature's made available, is there enough there to increase the pay scales, or is this additional legislation?
Again, part of that problem took place just because the way that the state contract within the union was structured was that we didn't have pay scales in order to be able to pay people what they needed and what they were worth. And so we basically said, okay, well, we can't pay you inside our scheme that we've developed. So you guys can pay them, we'll just give you money and you figure it out, because you're outside of the restrictions that we have here. So I would assume that it's simply a function of not having enough money appropriated into that to be able to, pay for the resources that you need to do the job. But I think that's an issue for law enforcement as well. We're seeing it more, it's becoming more and more difficult with the negative attitude that we have in the country toward law enforcement, that has been, it's a tragedy, because these guys are protect and serve. That's what they're doing, right? But partly because we've backed them into a corner, and for other reasons, it's hard to attract individuals into law enforcement. And I think we have to look at the system. This is how I described the system when I got into Concord, is that the way that we pay these guys is what I refer to as the wink and the nod system. I will gladly pay you less today for a good pension in the future. And that just is dangerous for politicians, because they love to kick the can down the road. Make them pay as you go, because if they don't have to pay as you go, they're gladly going to shortchange somebody today, because somebody else is going to have to deal with the obligation. And so again, I think law enforcement is an area where we're going to see that as an issue.
You mentioned high property taxes earlier. Because towns in New Hampshire pay for education primarily through their local property taxes, the quality of education varies from town to town based on, somewhat at least, the resources they can put toward that. As governor, what would you do to try to make that fairer or even it out, or should it not be?
Yeah. So you got a lot of questions wrapped up in that one, because it's about education, it's about property taxes, it's about the adequacy formula for education, which I happen to know something about because I sit on Division 2 in finance. So let me try and tackle those in a couple of different ways.
Sure.
So the first thing we have to recognize is, relative to education, I believe that a perfect storm is forming, that we are going to be in a position to be able to make some really positive changes to our public education system to move it into the 21st century. And I will, point to a couple of factors. One is that the system is going to collapse under its own weight. And I apologize for being the accountant, but we have a very high fixed cost. We've got declining enrollments, and so the cost per student just gets higher and higher. And eventually the property taxpayers are going to say, time out, is this really, what I'm looking for here? Am I getting what I need? The second thing I will point to is that we know that the amount of money spent in education does not have a direct correlation to the quality of the education that's taking place. And I'll point to just recently, excuse me. You got to talk a lot when you're an account or a politician. Oh no, I'm okay. Then I'll end up choking on one of those. We can't have that. So I don't know if you know, but just recently they released a list across the United States, the top 500 high schools. 3 New Hampshire high schools were on that list, and I'm proud that 3 were on that list. I wish there were a whole bunch more on the list. 2 of those were normal public high schools. Hollis, I think, was the highest normal public high school. They ranked 301st. But we had one at 44th, and that was in Nashua, the Science and Technology Academy, a charter school. And so what we have to recognize is the charter school is doing the education at half the cost of the public school. Now we can talk about, there are some reasons, the take all comers, all these different kinds of things, but at half the cost. We know from some of the private school options, we just had the case up in Croydon, and this is another example of kind of this perfect storm. Are you familiar with the Croydon? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So here you have, you have an engaged school board, an engaged parent, and a kid who's thriving. So what does the State Board of Education do? And by the way, so the Montessori school is now costing half the cost of the tuitioned out student that's a 40-minute ride away. And what do they sue? I mean, I just think that's a sign of desperation to save the system. Like, no, remember it's supposed to be about the kids. You're not supposed to save the system, you save the kids. Like the kids are supposed to be the ones being educated. And so I just think these 3 things are coming together. There are indicators that say the system is going to be ready for a change. And the good news is that that change is I don't have to come up with it. Somebody before me who's way smarter than me had already spent some time working on this. And so we've got laws in place, we've got regulations in place to create an environment that will drive some school choice into the system and create some options. And I think that is what's going to begin the process of helping us. How's it going?
Good, yeah.
Good. To bring down some of the costs. And again, you had a long question, so the next thing I'll say is the funding mechanism, right? Which is really, that's kind of where you were going, right? And I will tell you...
All of it.
Okay, so then I'll just keep going. So just tell me if I'm off track
here.
here. But the funding mechanism, I think this is going to be probably, one of the most important things I have to work on early on as a governor. Okay. Because... And again, this is just, there's a perfect storm. We have to make some changes. I mean, we've got wealthy towns, Dover and Bedford, have already sued. Wyndham's just lining up ready to get their money because they feel that they were shortchanged because there's the cap on the adequacy formula. Then we've got less affluent towns, Franklin in particular, and we're amortizing the stabilization grant away from them. And so they're saying like, well, wait a minute, we're not getting enough money to educate the kids. And so we're going to need to revisit education funding. We've got an adequacy formula in place right now at the state level. I think what we have to keep in mind is that it's referred to as an adequacy formula for a reason. It's not referred to as the best education you can get formula. It's called an adequate formula. And so I think there's a role for the state to play, and I think there's also a role for communities and local municipalities to differentiate themselves. So if the state is kicking in relative to adequate education, one community might say, we're going to invest a lot more in this, and we're going to, make our school the best education because they think they can attract, families and individuals and stuff into their school. Another school say, we're nearby, we're just going to use that money, we're going to tuition our kids off to some other place. Or they may create some choice options inside their town and say, well, you can use it for the Montessori school or some other school like that. So what I will say is, I think that is a legislative fix. In other words, that's not, as the governor, I'm not going to be the guy who just says, this is what it is. This is you got to bring all hands on deck, bring the people together, the parents, the teachers, the legislators, the taxpayers, everybody's got to be represented and say, okay, so what is this funding formula going to look like? I do think it is important that it gets resolved kind of legislatively. I'm not that happy with the court decision, because essentially what we've done is then we've delegated responsibility for education to a limited number of Supreme Court justices who decided that the word cherish in our Constitution means funding, and I think that that's a misapplication of that constitutional word, honestly, because if we have to cherish, if cherish means funding, where cherish is used in the Constitution, it says cherish, public education and seminaries, and nobody's interested in funding seminaries. So, I have a tough time pulling those together. So I think we need to legislatively fix that.
So, what would your interpretation of the state's responsibility be then, if not to fund an adequate education?
I'm not saying that they're not responsible.
Fund an adequate education.
Yeah, okay. Well, but according to the Supreme Court, we're following their mandate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I'm saying is that I think that the state plays a role in supplementing education at kind of I'll call it an adequacy type of a level. Okay. But then there's room for differentiation. In other words, so it's not a situation where then the state's supposed to pay for the whole thing. In other words, there's room for state partnership with the local municipalities to figure out what their education solution is for them locally.
And do you think that should be the same amount across the board? So the state says we're giving every district in the state, every public school district or every town and city, $4,000 per student or $5,000 per student, and then the rest is up to you? Or should it be targeted so that communities that can't afford to do anymore get more help, and Dover and Newcastle and are gonna be able to take care of themselves anyway?
Yep. So I think that's a decision that gets decided by this constituent when you bring everyone together to figure out, like, okay, so what is the state's role? I mean, I have ideas, but I got to hear what everybody else says, because I'm not the guy who gets to decide that.
Okay.
So one of my best friends from childhood lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. He and his wife have 7 children, all homeschooled.
Oh, how about that?
Sound
You know anybody
familiar?
else?
I do not, but I loved reading that on
Yeah.
So, and you've talked about education just
A
now at some length, but should we read anything into that in terms of where you stand on the value of a public education in this state today? Anything more you want to talk about?
Yes. Well, I mean, the main thing is I believe in the concept of personalized education. In other words, I think, and this really bothers me when I look at, what we've done with Common Core. I mean, essentially what Common Core is it's homogenizing education across the country. It's saying every 3rd grader shall be doing this, every 4th grader this, every 5th grader this. And we know that girls are way smarter than boys, and they're going to mature more quickly, and especially in 3rd grade. And so they're going to be at a different level than the boys are, and there's different levels among the boys. And so I think, in this kind of education revolution, we have an opportunity to move to a model of personalized education that really treats students as individuals and helps them, because they've got different learning styles, they have different paces that they learn on. And so I think we can embed this into our system and make it work for everybody. And when I say that, the individuals who I have in mind are, today the system, kind of this industrial education model, I'll call it, if you've got engaged parents who are helping you with your homework and making sure you got breakfast before you headed off to school in the morning and they packed your lunch, you're probably going to survive in that model. But it's the ESL kids, English as a Second Language, whose parents are not engaged, who are not getting a lunch, who are not getting help with their homework. Those are the kids that get left behind in this education model that we have. And of course, there's some that break out. You've got Dr. Ben Carson as an example. But for the most part, it becomes generational, and they get stuck in this cycle. And so I think it's because we don't have a system that is designed to make sure that each individual kid gets their maximum potential. And I think we can achieve that with personalized education. The example that I often cite is one of my own kids. So Jeremy is a great kid. He's one of my kids. What else would he be, right? Meaning I love him. Whatever he was, he's a great kid. But so Jeremy was slightly dyslexic. He was slow to read. So we had to work with him differently and craft some different things. By the time he was 12, he was reading fine. He was reading the Harry Potter stuff. And then he went on and he did well. I mean, he thrived because we crafted instructional opportunities that were designed to help him achieve his potential. And so this kid, he's in his senior year of college now. He just finished up an internship out of Google this last summer. And is summer over yet? Or I should say this summer. But a kid who's thriving, because you recognize that in the traditional way of learning, that didn't work for him, because the way he was learning was different. And so I think what we need to do is we can craft these opportunities for kids that learn differently to help them each achieve their potential. So personalized education. And I think that's really what the future is, which is why, the Common Core and the homogenization of education just is so disturbing to me.
And so if we were to pivot to public higher education,
yes,
and the costs that we all know about and the student debt loads that we all know about, as governor, any action, any plans, any thoughts about what you would do to begin to deal with those issues?
Yeah, so there's two aspects of this. There's community college and there's UNH, the university system. Relative to the community college system, again, some of these education innovation ideas that I think I have will really work closely with the community college system in particular, but the university system as well. Today, let's take high school. And today in high school, you've got a fixed component, which is 4 years, 180 days a year. You've got a variable component is, did you learn anything? A, B, C, D, F. These are completely reversed. They need to go the opposite direction. Because there are some kids who are going to be able to, so the fixed component is, did I learn the minimum academic information I need to get out of high school and engage culture and society, right? And the variable is, some of the kids are going to get through it in 2 years, some 3 years, some going to take 4 years, some maybe even a little bit longer. And I think when we do that, you're going to find then we can then work with the community college system. And so some of those kids who are finishing in 2 years, we can engage the community college system and begin to pull in some coursework, pull in some of the opportunities. In particular, I like the advanced manufacturing. Some of the trades could even be good. And there's other learning opportunities that they can get. And so that these are students who could walk out of high school with a skill into an employment opportunity. Say they get an advanced manufacturing certificate. They go to New Hampshire Ball Bearing and walk onto the floor and run one of the CNC machines down there out of high school, as opposed to Ball Bearing picking the kids up right now and saying, wow, they don't even know basic math. Like, what are we going to, I got to teach them some of this stuff before they can even get them up to speed. And what that does then is it actually creates, I see it creating kind of a highway, and a highway of opportunity, I'll call it. Because once they're in there working, every employer that I have spoken with says, if you got a person and they're in there working and they say, like, gee, I'd really like to become an engineer, they're going to help them. They can go to Keene State and work on does Keene State have an engineering program? I don't remember. I don't know if they do. I don't think they do, right? So it's a bad example, but they can go to UNH. They could do
technology and design.
Granite State, yes, okay. But the employer will help pay for it, and they'll probably give them some flexibility in their work schedules to be able to do that. And so then they could get that degree in engineering, and they're not buried in debt. So again, I think like right now we basically go public education, stop, so no choice, right, to all choice. And I think we have to gray that thing, So again, especially in those high school years, if you finish in 2 years, then you begin to work. So it's not a step off. It's kind of a transition into where do you want to go. We're going to get to the university system. There's a couple of things I think we should be focusing on. And again, I do know something about university in the sense that I have a bunch of kids. I've put 5 kids in college. So. Number one is tuition dollars need to go for education. And I'm concerned at the UNH level that some tuition dollars may end up in research projects. And that's not really where those belong. Those are grant opportunities. I love research. I think that's great. But if a kid's paying tuition dollars, I want those going to education. The second thing that I will throw out there is, I think here as well, we need to begin to rethink the model a little bit, because UNH is a public university, right? Which means it's public money that's going in there. And I think, and it's not unique to New Hampshire, but many of the public universities have structured themselves to imagine that they have to compete with the private universities. In other words, like they have these large endowments, as opposed to, I think the public universities should have as job number one and focus, and the mission should be all about top-end education, period. Not getting themselves involved in a lot of issues dealing with creating lifestyle experiences. I mean, we've got the $17,000 table, we've got the $6.5 million pool. I mean, those are all nice, but the point of public education, public dollars, is to educate the kids, not create those experiences necessarily. And if somebody wants those experiences, great, there's another product out there. It's called a private university, and you can pay, and the tuition is high, as opposed to, if we really want to serve the students, we should be like trying to drive that tuition down as low as possible, and all that money is just like driving hard towards, you know, a first-class educational opportunity for the kids.
So I actually have a couple of things I want,
Yeah, sorry,
I
yeah.
want to address.
Yeah,
that
I threw a
while
bunch of
it's
stuff out, yeah.
But just on the last issue, is the college, the university system is looking at, like at other entities. We need customers. We need students
Yep.
to make things
Yeah.
go. And they're looking at, we have to compete with those private universities.
Yep.
So that may be one of the things that's driving the $6.5 million pool and all of these amenities and building projects, and you see brand new dorms going up that are
Kind of
far
fancy.
better than
Some
what we
apartments.
remember going
Yes, exactly.
in college. Is your idea that they should just not be aiming at that they should say, well, if you want to go to a private university, go ahead and go to one, but we're going to be here in our own lane, and if you can't afford that, come here and we'll give you a good education without all those extras and amenities and sports stadiums and such. Is that the idea?
At least from a public funding standpoint, if they want to put up a stadium and the alumni want to do that, God bless them, have at it. If the alumni want to put a pool in and they want to pay for it, God bless them, they can do that. But yeah, I do think, rather than try to be, and again, this is coming from my business experience, you don't want to be a me too. And it was like, okay, so Dartmouth put in a pool, so now we got to put in a pool. Now you're competing with Dartmouth. You can also compete with Dartmouth by differentiating yourself and saying, we're offering a different product. And I would venture to say, and I think that the university system is recognizing this, particularly with the Granite State brand, is that there is an opportunity that people are saying, like, wow, the college experience is so expensive that if you came up and said, we're generic you, and we just give you a really top-notch education, there's a whole niche market out there just for that you could probably thrive and succeed. And the goal here is not to create, we're a public university, which basically means we're trying to create an opportunity for New Hampshire residents to have good access to a really top-end education. Isn't that what the mission should be of a public university? And so then I'm saying, let's focus on that as the mission and structure ourselves around that mission.
Okay. And then I want to step back when you're talking about community colleges. You got into high school and you're talking about kids who are equipped to finish in 2 years or 3 years rather than the 4 year. Is what you're talking about that when you say finish, what do you mean finish what?
Well, that you meet the academic requirements. We say, like, look, this is, if you want to get out of high school, these are the academic achievements that you need to do in order to get out.
So there would be a standard to be met.
Yeah, exactly. But there's kids, but again, kids work at different paces. So some kids are going to work through that really quickly. Other kids are going to take all 4 years to get through that process. But those kids who are, want to engage the process and tackle it and work on it, they can do that.
Okay, and then for those kids who are able to meet those goals in 2 years.
Okay. I used to say 3.5, but I've been told by educators they can probably do it in 2. So.
Okay, so
yeah.
But even 3.
Yes,
so
okay.
Is the idea then they would still be in high school, but you would start incorporating community college level work?
Exactly. You just let them continue going to do different things. But it would not be, graduation today is not determined by completing 4 years. Okay? Like ED 306.27 paragraphs E and F is the education requirement for graduation. It does not say you have to do 4 years. It says you have to meet the minimum requirements. So that's what I'm saying. This is already in place. So if we were to make that shift, it's nothing new. That already exists in our education statute. The problem is the system has inertia that just kind of goes, and you just do 4 years and you sit through these classes. But what it does, the way we can accomplish this really is to introduce into the system as well some choice. in terms of how kids are going to go through that process of acquiring those skills and those information to meet those academic achievements that they need. And you're going to find that some kids, might structure their class and they're going to say like, well, I'm going to do VLAX for my history. I'm going to have an instructor-led course for my calculus or my algebra 2, and I'm going to do a co-op with my science or something like that. So, creating flexibility in the schedule so that the kids can put together the information in the requirements and the courses they need in order to meet those achievement standards. And what that does really is it begins to shift the role of the educator, right? And you probably already figured that out.
Yeah.
So educators shift from, if today the educator says like, well, I provide content and the kids some get it, some don't get it, and then we just keep doing it until hopefully they get it or they run out of time because they've been in school long enough. Is what the teacher then becomes less of a just I provide instruction and more of a mentor for the kids, helping them guide them through. So because if a kid's learning from VLAX, but he has a question, like I don't understand something that I'm studying in VLAX, can you explain it? The teacher can explain that concept to him, or can direct him to a resource from Khan Academy or from the Vlog Brothers or some other thing else. There's all kinds of tools and resources out there. And so those, so the role of the teacher shifts a little bit as more of a mentor, which is really where these ESL kids can really be benefited the most.
Okay. Education fascinates me. So
Me too.
I could keep asking you stuff about that all day, but we don't
probably,
have all day.
Yeah, we don't have all day. But we should probably do that some more because they could probably learn a lot. So.
So I'm going to shift to infrastructure.
Yes.
Is one of the givens in New Hampshire is our roads and bridges need more attention than they've been getting historically. How would you deal with that?
Yeah, so the given I wouldn't say is that the roads and bridges need more attention. I'd say the given is that we have winter, and as a result of winter, our roads and bridges need constant attention in order to be upgraded.
Well, we have a lot of red-listed bridges.
We do 153,
and
right.
that's not a seasonal thing. It's that they've
It's
not
neglect.
been dealt
neglect.
with.
So a couple of things one is, and this is just kind of a broader statement, as I see infrastructure as marketing expense for the state. And what I mean by that is that, if you don't invest in infrastructure, you can shortchange that for a little bit, but eventually your customers don't come. You don't draw any customers. And that's what will happen with the state is, we've kind of cheated on infrastructure. Oh, we can handle a few more potholes or something like that. Then businesses are basically saying, like, look, I'm tired of breaking axles when I'm trucking my stuff on these roads. I'm going to go someplace else that I can, operate more efficiently. Or, the roads have not been upgraded enough for me to transport my goods, on these roads. So first of all, we have to recognize it has to be kind of you can't short circuit it. But historically we have. We keep stealing money out of the dedicated fund. And that's just part of the problem. And it's another one of these, legislative, weaknesses. I will gladly take the money out of transportation fund today in order to fix the potholes next year. And the governor needs to prioritize the budget so that that's not the case, because we end up, you get a short-term fix, but it's a long-term problem. Number two, we have to be smarter in the way that we are spending those dollars. So I'm in the town of Wilton. We had a red-listed bridge, because you bring those up. It was right near Fry's Measure Mill. And the state specification, how the state program works, is that they provide 80% and the local municipality kicks in 20% of the cost for the replacement. And they spec'd out near Fry's Measure Mill. Have you ever been there? Over in Wilton?
No.
No, okay. Well, it's kind of at the end of a road. There's only 2 houses past it on a dead-end road. And it's kind of like this quaint little boutique retail shop that's supposed to look really rustic and rural and stuff like that. And they spec'd out a $500,000, 2-lane road with sidewalks with big steel guardrails, and for that bridge. So it was going to be $500,000, and it was a red-listed bridge. Steve Elliott is our road agent, yeah, and I sit on the water commission with him, so I should know this, But so he's the road agent. He fixed the bridge for $80,000, so less than our 20% match. So you have to say, why is it that for $80,000 we could repair the bridge to the specification that it needed without spending all of this money? So, we have to be smarter. I can tell you another similar project that happened up in Hillsborough, which is a town that I represent, and they wanted a sidewalk for the kids to get to school, which made sense. But when the state got done speccing out the sidewalk, it was cheaper for the town to put the sidewalk in for less than their match associated with it. So, I think we can be smarter in terms of the way we're doing things. and so that's really, that's my view in terms of the infrastructure.
Okay.
With medical marijuana now in place, efforts are ramping up to decriminalize the drug altogether, and I was hoping you could share your thoughts on that.
Yep, so I do support decriminalization. I think that it makes sense. I first want to see our law enforcement resources directed at more important issues. The second aspect is that I am a firm believer in the concept of, the penalty should fit the crime. And so if you are, picking someone up for small amounts of marijuana, and generally they don't end up in prison, but they do end up with either a misdemeanor A or misdemeanor B criminal record. And everybody knows that when you're hiring somebody, I guarantee you guys are doing it here, when you hire somebody, you run a criminal background check on them. Before you hire them. And so they're going to get flagged. And so it's going to be very difficult for them to get employment. And so I think there's a moral issue here by cutting out a subset of the population, who are now forever tagged with a criminal record and therefore excluded from a lot of jobs. And I don't think that's beneficial to society. I don't think that's, fair to them in terms of, the penalty has to fit the crime. And so I think that decriminalization, where there are fines associated with infractions, makes sense, because we're not, maybe it's a $100 first one, it's a $250 the next, it's $500 the next. So it's enough of a deterrent that says, look, you're going to smoke marijuana, we don't want you, out in the public and in your communities. Just stay home if that's what you're going to do. And so I do support that. I think relative to medical marijuana as well, that two of the other candidates in this race oppose medical marijuana. They have opposed it, and they continue to drag their feet. And we have to recognize that, this is there are cancer patients who are benefiting. There are individuals who are suffering from chronic pain, and our only other option is we prescribe them opiates. And so we're creating potentially drug addicted people. And if marijuana, and a lot of times it's not smoking marijuana, it's a lot of the tinctures, it's a lot of the oils, the cannabis oils and stuff like that they're able to use that helps them to deal with that pain. That needs to be an option on the table. And then lastly, we have one of the highest veteran populations in the country here in the state. And a lot of vets that are coming back, are struggling with PTSD, and we know that this is, has been beneficial for many of those individuals as well. So, we need to make sure that we make these resources available to people, so that they're not turning to illicit activities. So,
and just to clarify, you've spoken about decriminalization. Legalization is what's your position on that?
Yeah, so I don't think we're ready for legalization in any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot of, let the other states experiment and figure out what that looks like, and then we can, in the future, we can take a look at that.
Possible that during the next biennium, Michael Addison will be due to be executed.
Right.
As governor, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, so I am a pro-life person, and that means from beginning to end. If somebody, for example, were to try and come after me and attack myself or my family, I would absolutely use force against them. I would use deadly force if that was necessary. But once someone has been incarcerated and locked away, I'm happy to just take the key and throw it away. I'm not a fan of the death penalty.
You kind of just touched on this with your thoughts on the Second Amendment. So with you being a strong backer of the Second Amendment, is there a role for the state in safeguarding people against gun violence?
There absolutely is a role for the state, and they are playing that on a regular basis, hopefully by enforcing our gun laws and enforcing the federal gun laws in the state. So that is the role that they play. I'm not a fan of additional gun regulations.
Can you come up with 3 things that you would do to keep young workers in the state?
To keep young workers in the state. Okay. Number one, we need good paying jobs. Okay. I believe it's a myth that the young people are not staying here because we don't have coffee shops and nightclubs. Okay. Again, I have it's anecdotal data because it's 3 of my kids, but I've got some other millennials, and, it's a great place to live. And I've got young people hanging out here, they're looking for a great place to live. And we offer, a lot of good things here. But we need to have good paying jobs that they can stay in the state. That is the number one thing that we have to do. Number two is one of the things that we're going to have to tackle, and I'll have to tackle as I kind of implement some of this, economic plan. We talked through some of my ideas like, skills and healthcare costs and stuff like that. It was like government doesn't create jobs, but they create an environment in which companies are willing to invest, individuals are willing to invest. And I think the things that we need to work on are the skills of the workforce. We talked about that, kids coming out of high school and not having the skills. Healthcare costs are one of the highest they are the highest healthcare costs in the country. Electric rates, we spend a lot of time on that. Business taxes are not great, and regulatory environment is not good. If we do these 5 things, then I think we can create an environment in which there are going to be more opportunities for the young people to get good paying jobs to be able to stay in the state. So that's number one. It's 5 things, but it's one, is create an environment for good jobs. Number 2, an issue that we're going to have to tackle is the housing situation. We have an aging population, and that aging population is living in, I'll call them McMansions potentially, but like large houses with large pieces of property. And younger people, A, can't afford those, and B, or maybe not be interested in that. So they want a different type of a housing option available to them. I would certainly not be someone who would say, it's a top-down, the state's supposed to dictate, but I would certainly want to encourage municipalities to recognize that if they want to attract younger folks, they're going to have a different type of a housing product available to them. And so, for example, in Wilton, where I live, we've got a 5-acre minimum, right? And so it's going to be very hard. But you may say you might say, hey, Wilton or other municipalities, have you considered, setting aside 20 or 30 acres? That is, you relieve them from some of these onerous, regulations in terms of what the zoning ordinance are and how you can build houses and the densities and stuff like that to create options. So I think that is another, it's another. If we expect to have these folks here, that's one of the things that we are going to have to tackle.
I just ask, how does that get implemented? Because it's not a state mandate to the communities to do this. So
all I can do is encourage it.
Yeah, but don't they already have the flexibility to do that, the towns?
They do, but who's encouraging it? I haven't heard from the corner office.
So it's just a cheerleading kind of thing.
It's a bully pulpit, hey guys, if you really, if you're worried about shrinking enrollments in your schools and how you're going to pay the bills and everything else, here's a tool for you to attract younger people because they don't all want to live on 5-acre McMansions. So.
Okay, so there's a third?
And there's 2. I don't have enough. Really, it's the jobs are going to keep them here, But I see kind of housing kind of follows on relatively quickly to that.
Okay. You mentioned healthcare costs.
Yes.
Healthcare is certainly an issue that gets a lot of attention
It is.
these days. After the November election, we could see, if things fall right, the attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which would undo the state's Medicaid expansion effort. As if you're sitting in the governor's chair at that point, what do you do to deal with all those people losing that care?
Yeah. So even if depending upon the administration down in Washington, you're right, it could or could not. But even if the administration doesn't change, they're going to run out of money eventually. In other words, so they're borrowing the money to fund the Medicaid expansion at this point in time. And we have no guarantee that funding will continue. So essentially what's happened is we have expanded welfare, but and many people treat it as a long-term program, just as yourself, you're saying, how do we go forward with this program, even though we keep only renewing it every 2 years, right? But we don't have a long-term funding mechanism for it, right? So essentially, we don't have a mechanism to pay for what we've promised. And so I think really, you have to have both in place. If you think that there's a need for a long-term welfare benefit, then you need a long-term funding mechanism in place. And we've been irresponsible, or the legislature has been irresponsible in authorizing that. And so kind of you have a broader question here. So, I would not renew so that will come up in 2018. And so I will not renew the Medicaid expansion.
Okay.
And I will find a transition plan for these individuals. The number one transition plan will be jobs that pay them well enough that they can afford health care. But the other thing is that we have to fix our healthcare markets, which have put healthcare out of range of individuals. In 1985, 3.5% of the citizens of New Hampshire could not afford health care or health insurance, and they relied on Medicaid. Today, 14.5% of the citizens of New Hampshire cannot afford health insurance and cannot afford health insurance, and they rely on Medicare or Medicaid. And so what we have to do is we have to fix our healthcare markets because, again, we have the highest costs. And there's two areas we have to focus on. One is insurance, and the other is the provider network. On the insurance side, we have got to open up the markets, and this is going to require some federal action. We've got to open up the markets so we can buy health insurance across state lines. We are simply too small of a state, and we have too small of a cohort to be able to have a competitive market to spread the risk sufficiently to have a lower cost plan available to the citizens of New Hampshire. The second thing that we need to deal with is we need to deal with our community rating laws that we have put in place. And this is irrespective of ACH. This is just stuff that we've done to ourselves here in the state. And I don't know if you know this, but after the merger with Anthem and Cigna, we're going to have one company that's going to control 90% of the healthcare market in New Hampshire. I mean, that can't be good for prices, right? And there's you got to have some choices in there somewhere. And so I think that we can, we need to back off of our community rating restrictions, which are what keep other insurance companies from coming in and selling. Because they're looking at other states and they're saying I could sell another product over here and I have flexibility in terms of how I structure my product. New Hampshire has so narrowly defined the insurance products that are available for sale that the insurance companies look at the market and say, not interested. I facetiously sometimes say, we've told insurance companies, we love you, come to New Hampshire and sell insurance. And you can sell any kind of policy you want as long as it's a red Yugo. Just to kind of just say how narrowly we've defined that. The second thing we have to deal with is on the provider side. On the provider side, we have in place anti-competitive laws. I sometimes feel like I'm in the 13th century and the 21st century is racing upon us, and we've drawn up the drawbridge and we said, oh no, it's scary out there. We got to protect ourselves. And the laws that I look at, there's a bill that just came through the House this last year, SB 482. And essentially, I mean, you guys may or may not know this, but we've put, anti-competition, zones around our hospitals. I don't know if you know that, but there's a 15-mile radius around every one of our hospitals that says you can't perform certain services inside that zone. We have put a mechanism in place that basically says, if you're going to perform certain services in this state, namely, one of the ones that I like to talk about is, knee and hip replacement. If you want to do that, which is, may require an overnight stay if you get your hip replaced, that you are going to have a 24/7 emergency room. Well, I mean, it makes no sense. If you're a knee and hip replacement, they have a 24/7 emergency room. The guy pulls up and he's in the emergency room and he's having a heart attack, and you tell him that you're going to fix his knees for him? That's not going to help. So what happens is the companies see these restrictive laws and they say, they're expanding in other states. They're doing well. They're lowering the cost of service. They're increasing the quality of the service. But they look at a New Hampshire market and they say, not there. Can't make it work. So they stay out of the markets is essentially what's happening. And so these are the kinds of things we need to do to be able to make health insurance affordable again for people. And the other thing we have, and this is related to the ACA in particular, is we've created an entire class of people that I refer to as the insured uninsured. In other words, they're just basically scraping together enough money to pay for their insurance premium so they don't get penalized. But the deductibles on these plans are $3,000, $6,000, $12,000. So even though they're paying for insurance, they can't afford to access health care because they can't afford the money for the deductibles associated with them. They would be better off not having all of these other scheduled services which they're not accessing anyways, and just have a catastrophic care plan. So they could pay as they go on the low end, and they have a catastrophic care plan at the high end that says, if I get cancer, if I get into a car accident or something like that, then I know I have insurance, true insurance, that will kick in and help me.
Doesn't that create the scenario that, for better, the Affordable Care Act was meant to address, which is that if people aren't in a catastrophic situation, but they don't have other coverage, they're going to end up going to the emergency room, which then gets spread around all the employers and others that are paying for insurance.
Yeah, and so have you seen how that's worked out here in New Hampshire? So our the Medicaid expansion is costing us $450 million, and we've saved last year $150 million in uninsured compensation. So in other words, so I'm a business guy, I invest in things. So if you invest $450 million and you're only going to get a return of $150 million, that's not a good investment.
Yeah, but under your scenario, wouldn't that end up spending more money around too, or are you just saying it would end up costing other employers less money?
Well, so what and I'm not sure I understand the question, so try to.
Well, you posited a scenario of having catastrophic care for people at the low end.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that drive them into the emergency rooms for less than catastrophic situations, which then means that the providers pick up the cost and then spread it around through everybody else's policy?
Or they access healthcare because they know they have a catastrophic plan, which means they are as a pay-as-you-go. And so you're right, but if they're pay-as-you-go and it's going to cost them a lot in the emergency room, then they're going to go to the urgent care instead of the emergency room. In other words, because I'm saying you're accessing healthcare the same way everybody else is, which is you pay for the services that you get. The difference is, right now, all of that money that they might use to go to the urgent care is being used to pay for a premium, but they still can't access the health care. But if they had that money, and particularly if we put it into an HSA account, and so they're accumulating money in an HSA account, then they have funding available to go to urgent care when they get sick, but they also have insurance when they basically have a catastrophe that happens. And in fact, this is a model that was used in Indiana. The state employment, or the state employee program put in an HSA plan there. And initially, there was not a lot of adoption. Like 4% the first year adopted this. Today, 98% of the folks in state employees in Indiana access this. And it's an HSA plan where basically what they did is they bought a catastrophic care plan for the state employees, and then they put, and that saved money on the premium, and they took the money that they had in the premium, and they put that into an HSA plan for the employees to be able to use to access health care. And so those employees now, because it's their money out of their HSA plan that they're spending, they've tended to be much more careful with that, and it's driven some consumerism into the system. And so individuals are saving up in their HSA plan. It's saving the individual's money, it's saving the state money, and everybody in the process is benefiting from that, except maybe, the system, which is not just collecting, lots of premiums that are not being used for anything. So, but again, that's how we're going to get the cost down, is we have to drive some degree of consumerism into the system.
All right. Well, that's it.
That's it? Okay.
That's what we got.
Okay. Well, if you have more questions, just ask me, and I apologize. I just can keep going on these issues.
Yeah.
Got a lot of passion about the issues in the state.
That sounds like it.
Yeah.
As you go around meeting people, what sense do you have in terms of the interest? We touched a little bit about this when you first came in.
Yeah.
What the interest is in the gubernatorial race, and it seems like there's a lot of, I don't know much about him or her out there.
But I think people are starting to tune in. I think what's going to happen on Tuesday, everybody's going to come back from vacation and really begin to pay attention. We've done actually quite well, garnering a lot of grassroots support. I mean, so a number of different organizations have jumped in and endorsed my candidacy, these are they're not like political groups necessarily as much as they are grassroots organizations who say, we think this is the guy who's going to help make once again the state accountable for the to we the people kind of thing. So
Excellent.
yeah, I'm excited, having fun.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.